Okay. Hi, John Haller here. Um, I've been trying to get this to go, and it's a constant battle. I hope you appreciate how complicated this can be when you do this. I talk to people who do these things, and they have two or three people that work with them, and they all say that going live is just a very difficult thing that they have to do. So let me just do a couple things here that I want to talk about. And I don't think I have a picture of it, but let me do a share screen here real quick. And so now my slide, now it's not letting me upload it. So look, if you want to go to my Real FBC Rumble channel, that's Real FBC, all one word. I uploaded a video there this morning. I was given an opportunity to go down to Fox News, came to Columbus yesterday, and did a Brett Baer and Martha McCallum did a live debate with the U.S. Senate candidates, Tim Ryan, the Democrat, and J.D. Vance, the Republican. I got an email and said, "Hey, do you want to come to our debate?" So I said, "Yeah, I'll come." So I signed up. I got the ticket, and then I got almost immediately I got an email from Martha McCallum's producer, and she said, "Hey, would you like to be on a small panel in the afternoon before the debate?" The debate was going to be broadcast live on Brett Baer's special report at 6 p.m. on Fox News. And I said, "Sure." And she asked me, what party I supported, and she called me back later and said, "Yeah, well, we'd like to have you come." So there were 12 or 13 of us, I think, on the panel. I think it was fairly evenly split between Democrat and Republican. So that was recorded at 3 p.m. on Tuesday. Then the debate was at 6 p.m. and the panel started a little bit after 3:30, and it was only 12 or 15 minutes long, and you don't get a lot of time on that. So I was able to make a couple of comments. Hopefully they were articulate and understandable, and of course there were people there. It was very interesting that the vast majority of people on the panel on the Republican side, I think every one of them was a good, solid Christian. Some of them we had attended the same church at one point in time. It was a big church, so I had not met him, but I knew the one gentleman's father. There was also a student there from Cedarville University, and one of the administration people had brought him over to the debate. He also asked a question during the debate at 6 o'clock. A really nice young guy, poli-sci, political science major. But it turned out that the Cedarville administrator had worked at the college where I went, and I was on the board of trustees for about 25 years. So it was just very interesting. It was just very interesting. It was a fun day. Got to talk a little bit to Martha McCallum and Brett Baer. But it was clear that there's just an incredible division in this country. But then as I look around the world, there were elections in a country south of the United States. I'm not even allowed to say it because I'm on YouTube, and they don't want any comments made about that election because I guess they like the result. And so, but that election was essentially 50-50. We just had the Israeli election. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. This is not going to be a very long update. So we had the Israeli election. That was very close. That was predicted to be almost 50-50 before, but there were some big surprises in the election. And And I personally think that they were good, but I'm sure there are plenty of people that will disagree with me. But back to the panel that we had, there were, they asked people, what did you think was a big issue was? And there was a lady that sat a couple people to my left, and she, abortion, and she had to be in her 60s. As we talked before the panel, it turned out that she lived literally around the corner from where we lived around the corner from each other for about 30 years in the same school district. But we have very different views. She's very much pro-abortion. There were a lot of pro-abortion people there. And the Democrat and left-leaning people, they tried to make that the issue. I think the rest of us were focused on the economy and some other issues. So the way they conducted the debate was they brought Tim Ryan out for about 25 minutes. They didn't have much in the way of commercial interruptions due to arrangements with the sponsors of the show. So it was Tim Ryan got time to talk. Martha and Brett asked him some questions, then audience asked him some questions. And it was very clear that he has a very different worldview than I do, the view of the world and the way things are. And he does not seem to be very conversant with things such as that we call facts. I've sort of been up and down on my support for J.D. Vance, but I will say that I thought he did an absolutely fantastic job at the debate. I think the one gotcha question that they tried to get him on was Tim Ryan claimed that he had said nothing about Paul Pelosi, and J.D. Vance said, "I'm not sure who your researchers are there, Tim." Of course, when J.D. Vance came in, Tim was out of the room, so they were never in the room together. But J.D. said, look, I don't want to see this guy injured. And I think this is the view of most conservatives. You want to see this guy get beat up. We disagree with him politically. We don't want violence or anything like that. But the narrative that they're trying to build is that everybody that opposes Nancy Pelosi who mentions her in an ad wants her to be attacked violently. And this is just a complete fabrication. I mean, this is pure propaganda that we're dealing with. And I think this is disinformation. They claim that the people on the right side of the political ledger engage in disinformation. And again, I think the rule of thumb, and I mentioned this to some of the people there, is that they will always accuse you of doing what they do. And I've been seeing Hillary Clinton out there. They're dragging out Barack Obama. They're dragging out Bill Clinton. And the political map is changing in the United States. I think there looks like the Republicans will do well, assuming everybody turns out. But I'm not. I'm sort of always. I'll believe it when I see it. I try not to get my hopes up, and I don't really think that. It's going to be very difficult. I think the Republicans, if they get control of both the Senate and the House, and as I'm watching the political map, I'm seeing things that the Democrats doing that I've never done. They're pouring money like crazy into New York. Lee Zeldin now appears to be in the lead in polling ahead of Kathy Hochul, the New York governor, who took over the unfinished term of Cuomo when he was forced to resign in a scandal last year or so ago. She's not doing very well. And now, her narrative that she's coming out with, well, who says crime is bad? Crime is down. The crime is only up in Republican cities. And the propaganda that I'm seeing is just absolutely it really is the most unbelievable thing I've seen in my 68 years. It appears that there are a lot of House seats and Senate seats that no one would have ever given a Republican a chance in. I see that the Senate race in Washington, Democrat Patty Murray, and I can't remember the gentleman's name who's running against her off the top of my head, that he is now in the lead in that. Blake Masters, the Republican in Arizona, got good news the other day when the Libertarian candidate dropped out last night. And so they're outside. There's no more early voting going on in Arizona right now, so everybody's going to have to go to the polls. And so there's a pretty solid belief that a lot of those votes that were going to go to the Libertarian candidate will not go to the Democrat, Mark Kelly. They'll go to Blake Masters. And so I think the good money right there is that Blake Masters is in the lead. Carrie Lake, I've seen some polling where she's running for governor against Katie Hobbs, who is the existing Secretary of State, who will be overseeing the election that she's running for and governor. I think there's a clear conflict of interest there, but be that as it may, it appears that Carrie Lake is open anywhere from a 4 to 11 point lead. And that's looking pretty solid. So the map right now is looking pretty good. Fox News, when they reported during the half hour that we were sitting there waiting to be on the panel, they were showing that Republicans could end up with 235, 245 House seats, which is a pretty big majority. Right now, it's very close. It's only like 4 or 5 majority for the Democrat. And I'm seeing some polling saying that the Republicans could end up with anywhere from 53 to 57 of the seats in the Senate. So if last night's debate is any indication, and of course I'm a Republican, I'm conservative, J.D. Vance will beat Tim Ryan. Tim Ryan did an absolutely pathetic job. I mean, it really was, it was pretty bad. And it was interesting yesterday morning. Sometimes I don't drink coffee. I've never drank a cup of coffee in my life, but to get my energy going in the morning, sometimes I'll turn on MSNBC and watch Morning Joe and Morning Mika, and they're whining and all the nonsense that they spew out because it gets my adrenaline going, helps me get through the day instead of drinking coffee. I have to shut it off when Pam gets up though. But yesterday they were saying, they were trying to pin what happened to Paul Pelosi, which we can all condemn. Should not have happened. And of course, that guy was a right winger. He lived in a house with a gay flag, but he's a right winger, MAGA, whatever. And then they went through a list of all the ads that people had run against Nancy Pelosi, mentioning Nancy Pelosi. And all these people are responsible for, the attack on Nancy Pelosi because they mentioned her in their ads, and that's asking for violence. It was then interesting that, I don't know if I flipped over to Fox or was still on MSNBC, but an ad for Tim Ryan, the Democratic candidate for Senate, came up, and right in the middle of his ad, he says, "And I stood against voting for Nancy Pelosi for leader, and I won't support her for leader." Well, so is he responsible too for this attack on Paul Pelosi? So the level of rhetoric in this election is probably the worst that I've seen in my lifetime. And I've been through some pretty back and forth elections. So anyway, let me do this. I'm going to talk to you briefly about the Israeli election, what happened there. And I'm going to try to do a share screen, and hopefully my okay, there we go. So this is not going to show up very well. Try to blow it up a little bit. I decided not to do slides because it seems like when I do slides, everything breaks down. So here's the, if you look at the right side of the screen, you can see a breakdown in the election. So when I looked at the polling before the election, and I read, I-24 News, Jerusalem Post, Israel Hayom, Mariv, and Haaretz, they were all predicting that it was Netanyahu might get 60 seats in his coalition. I'll explain that in a moment. That he might possibly make it to 61, but that it looked like he was going to not make it above 60. And with 60, he could not form a majority in the Knesset. You need 61 members of Knesset in your coalition to become prime minister. So they were talking about a sixth election. So if you think it's bad in the United States, imagine they've been through, this is the fifth election in 3 years that they've been through. And I was sort of looking at the up and down of the elections, and everybody said Netanyahu's done. He's never coming back. And even people on the right don't like Netanyahu. I mean, there's a lot of never Netanyahu people, just like in the United States, there's a lot of never Trump people. So, but Netanyahu seems to have this uncanny ability to put together his election. But leading up to the election, too, though, there has been a tremendous spike in violence in the Judea and Samaria, what is unfortunately referred to very often as the West Bank. There's been a big spike in violence there. There have been a number of attacks. There's been Israeli soldiers killed. There was a young female soldier killed at a checkpoint near Jerusalem a few weeks ago. And after, I think, a week or 10 days, they were able to track the guy down and shoot him and kill him, or as they say in the Israeli press, the terrorist was neutralized. I saw there was a car ramming attack at a checkpoint yesterday, but the soldier who was sort of pinned up against a barrier was able to get control of himself, and I think he shot and killed the terrorist when the terrorist got out of his car to come and shoot and kill him. So, but there's been a lot of, there was an operation called Lion's Den in Nablus, which is one of the seats of terrorism in Israel. Probably the worst areas are down around Hebron, Nablus, which is up, Nablus is where historical biblical Shechem is located. Joseph's tomb is located. And Jacob's Well is located at a Greek Orthodox church there near the Tel, the area where ancient Shechem is. And I've been there, and as you drive down the streets of Nablus, every intersection is this and this martyr square, and they have a picture, very, very nice painting of a terrorist, and he's smiling, beaming. I think in almost every case, these are male terrorists. This is one of the main areas where they came from that did like all the different bombings. I think the last bombing, there was a big bombing at up at Netanya on the coast a number of years ago, and I believe that terrorist came from Jenin, which is another city a little bit to the west of Nablus, a little bit north, sort of up towards Nazareth, if I have my map correctly in my head, and then down at Hebron, where the Tomb of the Patriarchs is. But in Nablus, I mean, everywhere you go, there's every intersection is a martyr square. And there's a very extensive refugee camp called Balata, not too far from the Tel at Shechem, that's been there since 1948. And that's where refugees live, and the Arabs keep them in these refugee camps. And this is true in Syria, it's true in Lebanon, it's true in Jordan. And a lot of times, for example, in Jordan, they're not allowed to participate in the political process in Jordan. There's certain jobs that they're not allowed to hold. And that's true, for example, that's true even though the wife, the queen, I guess, of Jordan, the wife of Abdullah II, is a Palestinian. And about 80% of the population is Palestinian, but they're really treated as second-class citizens. So they always say, oh, Israel, apartheid, and all this other stuff, and it's just as bad in most of the Arab areas. At least this is my experience and observation. I've been to Jordan as well and made the same observation, and that was almost 27 years ago. So anyway, I think that uptick in violence sort of led to a change in the way people vote. And regardless of what people say, oh, it's not that bad, just like in our country, one party is saying, oh, the crime's not that bad, it's all in your head, and it's really worse where you live. It's just absolutely insane. There was a lady on the panel that I was on yesterday. She said, I used to go to Chicago all the time. I spent some time talking to her. She's a fine Christian lady from over around Dayton, Ohio. And she said, I don't go to Chicago. And I'm the same way. I used to spend, well, Pam and I took our honeymoon to Chicago back in 1975. We would not do it today. I can't imagine a reason that we would go to Chicago for anything at this point, because it just does not seem to be that safe. So anyway, so that uptick in violence, I think, caused a change in the makeup of the election. So if you look, if you look at this chart, actually, maybe there's a little bit better chart. Here's a little bit better chart. So there are 120 seats in the Knesset. And so based on what it looks like right now, Likud, that's Netanyahu's party, got 32 seats. That's a gain of 3 from the last election, I think, May of 2021. Yesh Atid, that's Yair Lapid's party. He's the current caretaker prime minister. He's always been a caretaker prime minister because the coalition fell apart when it was time. There was an agreement between he and Naftali Bennett. Naftali Bennett would be the prime minister for a while, then Lapid would be the prime minister, but the coalition fell apart. But they let Lapid come in because I think Naftali Bennett just wanted to take a break. So you can see that what they have is up 7. And so so the coalition of Netanyahu will be Likud party. It will be the religious Zionist party with 14. And the gentleman who's the head of that, and I'm not going to remember his name right off the top of my head. He is being attacked viciously by everybody. And the Biden administration has said, if he is a minister in the government, we're not going to be supporting Israel. I don't think that bodes well for the United States. And look, he may have some things in his past that people don't like, and maybe he's repented of those, and so time will tell. But Netanyahu will bring him into his coalition. I just saw some articles a few minutes ago before I started that the Mossad and IDF are coming out and saying you can't let this guy become part of the coalition. You can't be part of the defense or security establishment in any way. So we'll see how that goes. But so right now, though, and these numbers are probably subject to change. They've counted about 97% of the regular votes, and then they have what they call the double envelope votes. Those are people who claim a disability, even though sometimes they don't have them. They do early voting. It might be people who are working, soldiers, and that type of thing. And that number has grown quite a bit over the years. I think there are about 500,000 or 600,000 of those double envelope votes that are in the process of being counted. So they have about 97% of the regular votes counted, and they have they're just this chart that I had first up here on the right. So this is 89.1% voted. That's just as about less than an hour ago. So what you need to do, and say at high turnout, one of the record turnout for quite a while, 73% of all registered voters came out. To become a party that sits in the Knesset, you have to get at least 3.25% of the vote. And if you get 3.25% of the vote, you will get at least 4 seats in the Knesset. And so this is where there's been a big change in this election. So if you go down here to so Likud picked up 3, Yesh Atid picked up 7, Religious Zionist Party picked up 7, the Shas Party picked up 2, and even this morning, some of these numbers were lower. Likud was really starting out at about 30 based on exit polling, but now they're at 32. But now when I'm looking at what they think that the Likud coalition will have 65 mandates, or 65 members of the Knesset. You have Likud has 32. You have Religious Zionists, which is 14, so that would make 46. You have Shas, which is 11. That would make 57. And then you have United Torah Judaism, which is 8. That gets them to 65. Nobody expected that. That is big. Part of the reason for that, and this could change, the Arab turnout was extremely low. The Balad party here was an Arab party, used to be part of the joint Arab list. It did not meet the threshold, so they get 0. And I don't think there's any way that with the votes that remain to be counted that they'll get to that. Remember, they got to get to 3.25%, but every time they count votes, all the other parties above them get about the same proportion of votes that they got in the votes that have already been opened. So the late votes don't usually help the Arab parties that much. They might help the left parties a little bit. One of the big surprises is Meretz, which is a really left-wing party. They got 0. They had 6 in the last election. Now, a lot of people are upset because the leader of the Labor Party, who is also this crazy leftist, and who was a minister in the government, I can't remember which one she had. I don't know if she was the energy one who shut down all oil and gas exploration in the Mediterranean last year, just as Russia was getting ready to invade Ukraine, when everybody needs gas and oil because of the disruption in the supply of gas and oil from Russia. But she refused to run on a joint list with Meretz. So if they had run together, all of the Meretz votes would have counted in the Labor-Meretz coalition, and they might have ended up with 7 seats. But Meretz is just below the threshold. They're at about 3.19%. They need 3.25, and it does not look like they're going to make it. So they get no members of Knesset in the next government. And the Labor Party, which had 7, is now down to 4. So that's a huge shift. So those lost votes essentially were picked up and moved into the religious right and the Likud parties. Yisrael Betanyahu, that is the party of Avigdor Lieberman, who was a finance minister, I think, in the last Netanyahu government, but he does not like Netanyahu. He has said he will never sit with Netanyahu. That party is mainly based in the north of Israel, up around Nahariya. A lot of Russian Jews, and mostly Russian Jews. They had 7 in the last government and were part of the coalition that allowed Naftali Bennett and Lapid to become sort of joint co-prime ministers, sharing the office prime ministers. And they dropped 2 down to 5. And that's kind of a big deal. The United Arab List, that's the Ram party, that picked Mansour Abbas, the head of that. They were in the coalition as well. They picked up 1. But there were some really big changes. National Unity Party, that's Danny Gantz's, dropped a couple of people. So big shift in Israel. And I think that if you look what happened in the country south of the United States that I'm not really allowed to talk to, the what you call the conservative side of the ledger, they picked up huge numbers of seats in controlling the legislature, but the head of their party did not become president. And there's a lot of riots going on in that country right now, so everything is kind of up in the air there. Again, everything you do is very divided. And of course, now they're saying you're going to see the narrative coming out, especially from the mainstream press in America, that Israel's in the control of right-wing extremist religious fascists. That's going to be the narrative that you're going to see. And, you know, some of these guys are pretty strong in their opinions, but they're no less strong than the left is the other way. So it'll be very interesting to see how this takes out. I think also part of the growth of the religious right parties in Israel is due to the demographics. They do have a lot of babies, a lot of people. They are a growth engine in terms of population. It can be. I remember when we went to Israel 5 years ago, as we were driving into Jerusalem, we went through some Orthodox neighborhoods, and I remember just looking at the street in essentially a kilometer. That's 0.6 of a mile that we drove down the street. I know I didn't count, but I know I saw over 100 baby buggies on the street. And when we went out to eat that first night we were in Jerusalem, every Jewish couple we saw had a baby. And it wasn't an exception. Every Jewish couple had a baby. When we were walking through the old city one day, we were following this guy. He's got 2 kids in a stroller. He has 4 kids under 6 hanging on his arms and legs, and he's trying to get up the steps in the old city. Kind of has these steps, long steps, because it's not level. And he's got his cell phone tucked in between his head and shoulder and talking on it to his wife, I guess. So he had 6 kids, and they all had to be age 6 or under. And that's not an unusual sight. So I think that demographics has some issue. By the way, if I talk a lot about demographics, there's a good article, I will talk about it on Sunday, about Japan. I'm trying to remember where I saw this article. It was in a magazine someplace. But the title of the article essentially was The Disappearing Villages of Japan. Japan is in demographic collapse. They lost 1 million in population last year just because of demographics. They're going to lose more this year. In fact, the article starts out with this statistic. There are now 11 million unoccupied residences in Japan. That is equivalent to the entire housing stock of the nation of Australia. So they're in collapse. China's in collapse. Russia is in collapse. And I'm not saying those countries are going away tomorrow. I think Iran is in collapse. And I think those countries that want to protect their legacy are much, much more dangerous in terms of war and what they're going to do. And I think this plays into Bible prophecy. And I've been talking about that for a couple of years. So right now, good news. If you like Netanyahu, bad news if you don't. Pretty sure he's going to be forming a government, and that government's going to last for 4 years. So the split, the constant series of elections that are going appears to be over. Now, it's very possible the Meretz, the left-wing party, might make the threshold. If they make the threshold, they get 4 mandates. Well, then those mandates have to come from these other parties above them. So it is possible that a lot of them could come from Likud. It's hard to say. It could come from the Likud coalition, and if they get the 4, you could see Likud drop down to 61 mandates. But it's also possible, as these votes get counted, that the Likud coalition with the religious right parties may end up at 67 or 70. So that's a very interesting development. Now, the question is, does that translate over to what's going to happen in the United States next week? And right now, the indications are that it will. But here in the United States, though, when we have an election like that in the midterm, the administration does not change. And so there will be epic battles if the Republicans take control. And if the Republicans take control, you're going to see stuff coming out of a lame duck Democratic Senate that will probably blow your mind. They're gearing up for it. So just be prepared to watch for that. So that's interesting. So the other thing that I wanted to, there's 2 articles, and I'm going to talk more about them Sunday. I would highly recommend that you go to theintercept.com and you read the article on Truth Cops. The Intercept is not a conservative publication. I would call it center left. A guy named Lee Fang wrote an article published on Monday about the leaked documents outline DH's Department of Homeland Security's plans to police disinformation. And this article is very, very important that you read if you want to understand. This was one of the comments I made, was able to make in the panel that I was very concerned about this. And I actually think I referred to the Intercept article and what's that going to do. And that I knew that Tim Ryan would never protect us from what's going on here, and JD Vance might. And that was one of the reasons I was going to vote the way that I did. But this article ought to absolutely, this article scares me, because what it shows, if you go through here, they have pulled out many, many documents. And this started under the Trump administration. So the Department of Homeland Security was started back in the early 2000s after the 9/11 attacks, and was supposed to protect us against terrorism. And we saw, and I talked a lot about this, in 2021, the FBI tweeted out that they were going after homegrown extremists, and they took the Islamic terrorism pictures from their Islamic terrorism annual reports, and they applied them to people on the political right in the United States. Now, look, there are extremists on the political right. Everybody knows that. But there were a lot of conservatives there last night at the debate here in Columbus that Fox News had, and I can tell you there were no right-wing extremists. There were no white supremacists. Some of these were people that, if I didn't know them directly, they were people that I knew. We had multiple connections. It was pretty amazing. There were, like I said, there were a lot of people there who were sort of tied to Cedarville University and the college that I went to, and churches that we had attended. But these people there were no white supremacists. This is just a complete fiction. But now they've shifted this over. And so what this article establishes, without any question, a lot of this article is based on documents that came out of the lawsuit filed by Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmidt against the tech companies and DHS. And they've now produced a lot of documents and emails, stacks and stacks of them, that show what the big tech companies did was they set up disinformation portals that the government, if they saw something they didn't like that was being said by people online, they filled out this form, and in almost every case, what they called disinformation or misinformation was taken down by the tech companies. So in other words, the government outsourced. The government cannot do this directly because of the First Amendment. So now we have a whole regime in charge here in Washington that says, well, we can do this indirectly. And this is, in my view, and the view of the people in this lawsuit, I think some other attorney generals have joined in, maybe up to 17 of them in this lawsuit. And this is clearly unconstitutional conduct. And this is going to be an epic battle. My congressman here in Ohio is a guy named Jim Jordan, and he's going to be heading up one of the committees that, if the Republicans gain control of the House, they will be issuing subpoenas like you would not believe, to investigate this and to make it an issue and to deal with it as best they can, even though they will have an administration and a Department of Justice and a Department of Homeland Security that will fight them tooth and nail over this. If you've not seen anything, like I said, if there is a shift in the House, it certainly looks like they're going to be, looks like it's going to be in the Senate as well. There are going to be some epic battles on this issue, because this goes kind of the core of American values and constitutional freedoms. So you want to pay attention to that. And I got one more thing to talk about. They're starting this climate summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, which is down in the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula. And one of the things that's going to happen there is a interfaith religious thing, returning to Mount Sinai, a prophetic call for climate justice and ceremony of repentance. So this is Mother Earth. This is Earth worship, interfaith, ecumenical, everything that you would think about end times religion. You're going to see on display here at this ceremony. And they chose, this is the traditional site of Mount Sinai and the Sinai Peninsula. A lot of people, me included, lean towards Mount Sinai actually being over in Saudi Arabia. But Sharm el-Sheikh is right across the Red Sea, or right across the ocean there from the Gulf of Aqaba, from Saudi Arabia, and where they're building Neom, and they are starting to build Neom. And I'll have more about that on Sunday, and more about the big conference that took place, the Financial Investment Initiative Institute conference that took place in Saudi Arabia, with all the big tech business executives, that type of thing. Also talk about the fact that Japan and Turkey are digging deeper into developing central bank digital currencies. Those are going to be tied to social credit scores. And that's developing in a lot of countries right now. I do think this plays into this final economic system that we talk about in Bible prophecy. So we'll talk about a lot of that, and we'll have updates on the Israeli election and that type of thing. So if I'm going to ask a question, so I'll take just a couple minutes and go through questions if I can find them here. What would I recommend doing with your money? So I don't give financial advice. If I knew more about that, I would probably be doing this from my residence on a fancy golf course, a private club someplace. And I'm not, so I'm reluctant to give financial advice. I will say that I do have funds with a company. I'm not going to name them, but I went to a seminar that they conducted on Monday for about 3 hours. And it was very interesting. I've worked with bankers and that type of thing all my life. I can tell you that it was surprising. They came out and said, we missed a lot of things. And they were asked very direct questions. What do you think is going to happen? And they were very honest. We do not know what's going to happen. This is a financial situation in the world unlike anything we've ever seen. We're doing the best we can. They were asked questions about diesel shortages and that type of thing. The guy sitting next to me at the table, I don't think I'll identify him by giving information. He worked for a Department of Defense contractor at a big base here in Ohio for many years. He has a daughter who works in the petroleum industry. She worked in the South and for one of the major oil companies. They had a 20-story building in this one state. I don't even think it's a state capital. It's a big city in the South. They had a 20-story building. After COVID, they now occupy less than 2 floors because people are working from home, and they've consolidated research people, geologists, and other things into another city in the South. So what I know from working in commercial banking is that pricing, that destruction of demand for office space across the board in the United States, it's down about at least 30%, if not more. I know of law firms that used to have 2 floors in the building where the law firm that I was with for many years until June was located. They now have less than half a floor. But that demand, what I would call that demand destruction for commercial office space, has not been priced into the market. And when the banks are sort of forced to price that into the market and value the assets that they have in their loan portfolios, you're going to see this stuff is not priced into the market yet. It's going to be epic when it occurs. And I went through, back in 2008, I sort of switched over to commercial banking, foreclosure work, and that type of workouts and that type of thing, in addition to some other litigation. So I know what happened in 2008, 2009, and the 5 or 6 years thereafter. And I think that when this hits, it's going to be far worse than 2008 and 2009. So I don't know what to do with the money. All I can say is that in these times of great or great economic collapse, those usually lead to war and rise of regimes that want to do war. So I don't really know what to say other than that. I saw a question up there about someplace. I saw a question about Korea. I don't remember what the. Hang on here. Let's be down here further. Somebody asked me a question about the Ripple lawsuit. I have to admit to you, I am not familiar with that. I don't know which one you're referring to. I am going to be watching. There are some lawsuits that are pending regarding a certain state-approved treatment that's coming up. There's some hearings in that in front of the 10th or 11th Circuit here in the next couple of weeks, and I don't remember the name of that lawsuit. So here's the question, Suzanne. Next one. What are your thoughts on North Korea now supplying missiles to Russia for use in Ukraine? And what country do you think will follow suit? Well, it seems that Russia is getting a lot of support from certain countries. I talked about it Sunday. Iran is supplying a lot of missile technology. There is a great article at the Tablet by Michael Doran, Doran, the Tablet magazine. You can, I think it's, get enough articles free that you can read the ones that I refer you to. It just came out yesterday, and it's talking about the missile and drone technology development in Iran. I'm also hearing some rumors. I haven't been able to confirm them yet. I will pass them along, but I want you to understand that they're rumors that there was a report in a Turkish newspaper today that Iran is trying to restart the nuclear talks again by meeting with the UN part of these nuclear arrangements in Vienna in the next week. If there ended up being some kind of deal, that could result in literally hundreds of billions of dollars coming into Iran's coffers over the next year, and up to $1 trillion by 2030. I talked about that a few months ago. That may be back on track now. So put that together with what Iran is doing, supplying Russia, and Iran's development of missile technology. And as this technology gets cheaper and cheaper, guidance systems and that type of thing get better and better. And part of the deal with Russia getting drones from Iran was that Russia would launch a satellite, and probably a sophisticated satellite, for Iran. So now they're getting them from North Korea. And I think there's been a pipeline between North Korea and Iran for many years. North Korea does have very good missile technology, it appears, or they're still developing it. Some of their missiles are, I will just say, scary bad. So who's going to be the next country to come along and supply Russia with missiles? I think there's some things that I see China coming in, but I also see Israel turning, and I think that was one of the points of Michael Duran's article in Tablet, was that Israel's sort of turning to China because they just don't trust the United States. Also, one question related to the election that keeps coming up. They just did the maritime deal with Lebanon. Lebanon's government, the caretaker president, he's out of office now. They can't form a government there. They're going to continue to be in collapse. But the one thing that they're all sort of united on in Lebanon is that Israel can't back out of the maritime deal because of the guarantees made by the United States. And it's not really a deal, remember, between Israel and Lebanon directly. It's they each made a deal. Lebanon with the United States, Israel with the United States. And so that's at least my research today indicated it would be very, very difficult for Israel to back out of that maritime deal, even with Netanyahu in office. And that's one of the reasons why they constructed the deal the way they did, was to make it impossible for Netanyahu to do anything about it when he got into office. It's very similar to the way the original JCPOA between Iran, United States, the nuclear deal there, was constructed to make it almost impossible for the United States to get out of without a lot of problems. And Obama did that on many things. I could talk on and on and on about that. So let's see. Question, John, did you watch the video on this link, the Yanuka fellow in Israel? Yeah, this guy's been around for a couple years. He's interesting. I think in some limited parts of the Orthodox community, he is highly respected. Some have sort of attributed messianic type qualities to him. They've claimed that he's performed certain miracles. It's interesting that he burst on the scene about the age of 30. He's now, I think, 32. I've also seen articles that say, the only people who are really, really, really impressed with this guy are the Christians who are running around talking about it in Bible prophecy circles. And I think that might have been true 2 years ago, but I think it's changed a little bit. But I still don't know how much traction he's getting among broader communities outside of a limited set of the Orthodox community in Israel. That's sort of where I'm at right now. So I'm aware with him. I'm aware of him. And but look, Jesus said there would be false Christ that would arise, and it wasn't one or two. He said false Christ, and so be careful that you don't be deceived. And that was the main warning that he talked about. So anyway, let's see. I'll take one more question here if I see one. So, okay. Well, look, I'm going to sign off. Appreciate your time. As always, they took a little bit longer than I did. If you want, go to Rumble, Real FBC. You can see the video of the panel that I was on last night. And I think if you look on Getter, you'll probably be able to find, if you have a cable subscription, you can access a lot of things on Fox News. Sometimes it's a little difficult. But I would recommend watching the debate. I thought everything was very fair in the way it was conducted. Everybody got an opportunity to say their piece. The two candidates, the audience got an opportunity to interact a little bit. But you can judge for yourself. So that would be on Special Report with Brett Baer that aired at 6:00 last night on Fox. So anyway, look, thanks a lot. I'm going to sign off. And talk to you later. Thanks.